We're joined by the Defence Secretary, John Healey. A very good morning to you, Defence Secretary. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Why don't we just pick up there rather than today's date in a moment, which we'll get to. And do you think that the safety of Ukraine has fallen since the US election result last week?
No, I don't. The US, alongside the UK, have been two of the leading countries that have been standing by Ukraine, supporting Ukraine. Our determination to do so is just as strong. And I was at a NATO defence ministers just 2 weeks ago when all NATO nations recommitted to stepping up support for Ukraine at this time when they're under pressure, but Russia is weakening.
But does really the only countries within NATO's support that makes a big difference remain the US's support?
It's certainly the case that the US has been the outstanding supporter of Ukraine. And that's because on a bipartisan basis in the US, they recognise the importance of stopping big countries redrawing international boundaries by force and allowing aggressors like Putin to launch illegal invasions. And as far as President Trump goes, he recognises that countries get security through strength, just as alliances like NATO do. And I expect the US to remain alongside allies like the UK, standing with Ukraine for as long as it takes to prevail over Putin's invasion.
I wanted to touch on today, and of course the Prime Minister's travelling to Paris, the first UK Prime Minister to commemorate Armistice Day in France alongside the French President since Churchill in 1944. Why does the Prime Minister feel it's important to go there today?
This is a special year. We mark 80 years since the D-Day invasions and some of the critical battles that liberated Europe and ended the Second World War. And this is also a mark of the close relationship between the two leaders, between Macron and Starmer, but also the historic bonds between our two countries and between our two militaries. So Keir Starmer being the first leader since Churchill to join the French commemorations in Paris of Armistice Day is very fitting. And today of all days, it also reminds us that we can never take the freedoms we enjoy in Europe for granted, particularly at this time of a war in Europe and Putin's aggression towards the West.
I wonder what you feel, Defence Secretary, towards, there's been talk in recent years of a need for conscription, for example. And I wonder whether you feel like my generation, indeed the generation that follows mine, depending on how we define that, lacks the same sense of duty and bravery and commitment that those we are remembering today and this weekend had.
I've had this enormous privilege in the 4 months of doing this job to meet some of the most inspirational people in my life. People in uniform who are really undertaking the ultimate public service, willing to put their lives on the line for the rest of us. So there's no shortage of courage or professionalism in the British forces. What I think there is an increasing, perhaps, lack of full understanding of our forces. After all, last year marked 60 years since the last of the national service generation was discharged. And so I think we need to do more and use remembrance and armistice, not just to recognise the sacrifices of those who gave so much, but also to remind ourselves that peace and freedoms are hard won, must always be defended, and to encourage the new generations to understand better. And I must say I'm really encouraged. Compared to 10 years ago, I go into schools in my constituency in South Yorkshire, and many more are doing projects, many more are doing pieces of work that help them understand the role of the armed forces today and the sacrifice of those in the past.
And you have, I think I'm right in saying, personal experience of what I guess war on Europe's eastern flank can do to inspire a new generation. Your son?
Oh, indeed. It came out of the blue, really, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine back in February 22. Our son came to me and said, Dad, if I was Ukrainian, I'd join up. I'd join up today. And then a few weeks later, he said, I'm going to join the army, I'm going to join the reserves. And that's what he's done. I couldn't be more proud. But as Defence Secretary, it also helps me understand the solemn responsibility that I may have to commit British troops to areas of danger or to conflict. And in doing so, it helps me, I think, understand the feelings of the families that support them, but also carry the anxiety if their loved ones are serving in uniform and protecting the rest of us.
Everyone has commented, Defence Secretary, in recent years, you have yourself in recent months, that this is a more dangerous time that we live in. Do you think it's possible you might have to commit British troops to harm's way in your time as Defence Secretary? Or is that still overwhelmingly unlikely?
It's impossible to predict the future. The importance of having strong armed forces, well equipped to fight, is that they're better able to deter. And deterrence is really the ultimate for a peace-loving democracy like ours and a peace-seeking alliance like NATO. Deterrence, strong deterrence, is the answer to those who would do us harm. And that's why across NATO, not just in the UK, our task as defence ministers and defence leaders is to make our forces better fit to fight, better able to deter, and therefore able to defend ourselves if necessary.
On our own, are our forces strong enough to have that effect right now?
But we're part of an alliance of 32 nations. It's the strongest, most successful alliance in history. And it's an alliance that is stronger still since Putin invaded Ukraine, with Sweden and Finland now full-scale members. And our task as the UK is to continue to be the leading European nation within NATO. I'm determined that we will play that part, and I'm determined that we will give the fullest possible support to those who sign up, serve in our forces, and provide such an inspiration to the rest of us.
If the US, though, did U-turn or even slightly turn away from its commitment to NATO, would we be in a very weak and exposed position?
No, but we wouldn't be in a weak position. I don't expect the US to turn away from NATO. They recognise the importance of the alliance. They recognise the importance of avoiding further conflict in Europe. But I do say, and I've argued for some time, that the European nations in NATO need to do more of the heavy lifting. It's one of the reasons that the UK and Germany have forged now, within 4 months of becoming a new government, the deep new defence agreement. It's part of reinforcing the European leadership in NATO, and we will play our part in that.
Sorry. Defence, you say they, the US, believe in NATO. Who is they when you say that? It's all change over there.
No, there's very strong bipartisan support, and the US commitment to NATO goes back decades, and that has remained, including through the previous President Trump administration. Yes, of course, he pushed rightly. He pushed European nations to do more, to fund NATO better. But the US commitment to NATO, to peace and security in the North Atlantic and Western Europe remains as strong. And the recognition of us all as NATO members now is that the security in the Indo-Pacific is indivisible from that of the North Atlantic. So the US has a strong interest in a strong NATO. As I say, President Trump has quite rightly an article of faith. Strength means security. Security and peace achieved through strength.
Obviously, we've just had the budget, Defence Secretary, and I'm not expecting it to be reopened in the short term. But just interested in your insights as to how hard you fought the Chancellor for more money sooner.
Well, I know we've been used under the previous regime of ministers fighting in government and in public with each other. That's not the way we've conducted arrangements. Everybody agrees that defence spending must increase. We've got a government commitment that will set a path to spending 2.5% of our national income on defence, and we've made a start. Next year, the budget for the defence will increase by £3 billion, and that's a sign of a of a government that recognises the first duty of any government is to defend the country and keep our citizens safe.
Do you think that the US could be more appreciative of the role that the UK does play within NATO, within the continent of Europe, whether that's politically, whether it's diplomatically, or actually, I mean, with bases that they get to use on our soil and our territory? Do you think that that is underrepresented in the eyes of America?
I don't. I believe America, right across the political spectrum, and certainly within the military, recognise that the UK is the US's closest security ally. That's been the case for decades, and it will remain. It will remain under this government in the UK. It'll remain under the Trump administration post-election.
Defence Secretary, Israel is warning, according to reports, that there might be more anti-Semitic attacks across Europe, and specifically saying they don't recommend its citizens to travel to foreign sporting events following, of course, what happened in Amsterdam last week. Is there a risk of that in your assessment in the United Kingdom?
If there's any sporting events that may involve Israeli teams, if there's any risk of that, then we as a government and our security forces will be well on top of that and ensuring that we don't see anti-Semitism on our streets and we don't see any sort of violence or abuse.
And just finally, Defence Secretary, again on this day, this weekend of all weekends, just wanted to touch on something you brought up there yourself. But I guess if the day came where you did have to put our troops in harm's way, is that something that you wouldn't pause to do?
It's part of the responsibility of the job that I've taken on as Defence Secretary. It's one that is a heavy responsibility, but an important one for any government, any Defence Secretary. And as a government, we will always do what's necessary to defend this country.
Defence Secretary, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.